All right, let's jump in and get you ready for your pre-release with the Final Fantasy Magic the Gathering pre-release guide. And just a reminder, I will be participating in Wizards early access event on Arena. I will be streaming live on June 4th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be over on Twitch. I encourage you to come out and join chat, ask questions, and watch how I end up playing with this set. Now, if you don't know the set mechanics yet, pop over to my set mechanics guide and familiarize yourself with the key set mechanics over there. If you already know the set mechanics, then you're in the right place. We're going to go over how you build a winning deck and a winning strategy. All right, let's start with an overview of the general archetypes, and then we'll dive into individual color analysis, followed by more details on the archetypes. White-blue artifacts, yes, I agree with that 100%. That's exactly what you're doing. You're going to go for affinity, get out that flyer really fast, and try and beat them down using artifact synergies. Blue-black control, I think that it's more of an artifact surveil build where you're looking to take advantage of artifact synergies and surveil synergies with flashback spells in particular. Black mage aggro is basically just an artifact wizard build where you're looking to make a lot of creatures that ping down your opponent whenever you cast a non-creature spell. The artifacts do a great job of that, so look for equipments, look for non-creature spells that are removal. It seems like a great build. Red-green landfall aggro. It's more of a self-mill ramp strategy with saga creatures into big trample haste creatures, but there are some chocobo crossovers. There are some other things that you can do with it, but really you're just looking to get as many lands on the battlefield as quickly as possible. The green-white go wide strategy is there. You can certainly use spells to go wide, but I also think that the saga creature strategy is probably more relevant, and also looking at legendary creature strategies. I think it's a good 2-color base if you're going to go into 3, 4, 5-color legendaries in particular. The artifact creature sacrifice build for white-black is quite good. There's a lot of life gain synergies, so be sure to capitalize on it. It's a great base for a legendary creature strategy as well, because a lot of the legendary creatures care about gaining life. The blue-red non-creature spells that are big, yeah, 4 cost or more seems fine. You are also going to be looking to get card advantage there. You're going to be outdrawing your opponent and taking full advantage of the flashback spells. The black-green graveyard value self-mill strategy definitely supports 3-color decks with ramp, so I'm looking at Jund, I'm looking at Sultai, but I also think there is an Abzan legendary +1/+1 counter life gain deck within that graveyard value build, so don't overlook the Abzan build with the black-green base. Red-white equipment aggro, it's going to be fantastic. It's a good deck. Slam together a bunch of low-cost equipments and go to town. It's also a good base for a legendary creature strategy. There's a lot of legendary creatures in red and white. A lot of them care about artifacts and equipments in particular, so I think there is a good viable build there. The green-blue town ramp build is probably the one I'm most nervous about. There are a few playable cards, but there's just not a lot of cards printed there. So I think it's going to fall flat to the red-green ramp, or it might end up aiding that into a teamer build of sorts, or fall flat to the graveyard value Golgari black-green strategy. So I think the town ramp has some merit in terms of if you're playing a 3+ color strategy, but be careful. I think a lot of times you're going to end up using it to support a different win con, not just I have towns so I win. So hopefully you can see that this set is much more complex than just at the surface build the deck with 2 colors. There's a lot of cross synergies going on, so let's dive into each color individually so you know how to mix and match better and can build a variety of decks with more confidence. Starting with white. White's pretty versatile in that it supports a lot of different builds. The first way you can take white is to focus on artifacts and equipments and go for an artifact equipment build. There's lots of cards that synergize well with artifacts and equipments, and Weapons Vendor is a pretty good common if you're going to go into a heavy equipment deck. It also pairs well with the sacrifice deck and going wide strategies. Speaking of which, going wide is the other white build that you could be doing. You're just looking to put a lot of bodies on the board and beat them down with a go wide strategy. There's some pretty cool evasion and other tricks that you have access to in white that can really make this build shine. The last white build is that legendary creatures matter. There's an extraordinary amount of white creatures that are legendaries, and you can play this in either the go wide strategy or the equipment strategy as well. They're not exclusive to each other. However, I think it's important to note that if you are doing the legendary creatures matter build, you're going to want to focus on some life gain synergies as well. White is rounded out with a few cards that don't really fit into any of the types, but offer good support and removal no matter which archetype you're playing. Moving on to blue. Blue has a heavy emphasis on artifacts. There's lots of really good payouts. This Valkyrie aerial unit does pretty much everything blue wants to do. It's got some good commons to get you there that are also artifacts, and some nice build arounds involving a few other vehicles and equipments. In blue, you're either going more aggressive, relying on cheaper spells to be able to tempo out your opponent, or you're going big into the 4 mana or more non-creature spell deck. Although there is some overlap, they play completely different, and the one that's 4 or more is looking for flashback and more value. Blue also has this really cool build involving Matoya that is a surveil draw card deck. I don't think you should overlook this archetype as it fits really well into artifacts, and 4 mana or more matters. Blue has access to some decent uncommon and common filler cards that don't really synergize, but they're playable. The town deck cards in blue are not that exciting. They're playable, but not exciting. Lastly, one of the stronger things that blue offers is definitely some bounce and tempo. In this set, being able to reset your sagas, bounce your creatures, get more value is just really strong. So anytime you're flickering your own permanent can be absolutely devastating for your opponent. Moving on to black. Black's commons are absolutely incredible, especially at the 2-drop level. The Black Mage's Rod and the Hekdais are just ridiculously good commons. Not to mention that there are some pretty great rares in black, and there's really good removal suites. So overall, black is really, really strong in this set, with some pretty cool win cons scattered across the curve. Black's value is also off the charts, with at common Vincent's Limit Break, with any saga being able to bring it back is incredible value. I think the black sacrifice artifact deck is looking extraordinarily strong, especially with the Albed Scavengers and some sack outlets. There's some nice synergies with treasure tokens, and it does have some of the bombiest cards in the set. Black has a lot of cards that also make you lose life or help you lose life in this format, so just be careful about making sure that you're overcoming that with some life gain. It also has some really ridiculously difficult cards to cast that are incredible, so finding ways to cheat them onto the battlefield is just that much better. I also like the Darkness Crystal quite a bit. I think it's a very strong crystal. Most of the crystals aren't great in Limited, they're just okay, but I do like this one quite a lot. And of course, black has the normal recursion spells that are going to be really strong in this set, with some self-mill to help you fuel your grave. Final Days definitely cares about creatures. Just be careful that you are creating a creature deck or an artifact deck. So in this format, I think especially with black, you really need to focus on, is this a creature or is it a non-creature spell that makes a creature? And that'll be a really big difference between what deck you're going to play. Rounding out black, just like white has some very solid filler that can complement any black deck. It's not necessarily synergistic, but playable if you need it. Moving on to red, red has some really great removal and some awesome burn. Choco Comet is an incredible win con. It also has some very powerful saga creatures and build-arounds. I think the majority of red, though, is going to be really focused on an equipment build and going aggro with the equipments. Gilgamesh is an absolute bomb. I think it's going to be incredible in this set. I would definitely be on the lookout for that card. And there's tons of support for any equipment build with lots of commons and uncommons to get there. Not to mention that the equipment builds go really well with the non-creature spell builds, so pinging your opponent down becomes a very real threat if you just have a bunch of wizards that are dealing 1 damage every time you cast an equipment. I also want to note that in this set, I do think that the Steal and Sack is a viable build. And there's a handful of red cards that care about landfall, so don't overlook those either. I think the haste on the bigger creatures at the top end for red is quite nice. Red also has a whole bunch of playable commons and uncommons to support different builds. The only thing is that they're much more specific than some of the other colors and require a lot more work to make sure they're in the right deck so that they can shine. Some of these are completely unplayable in the wrong deck and really require you to focus on building around them. So be careful with the red cards there. Moving on to green. Green has a little bit of removal. It has some shenanigans that it does with sagas, and it also kind of wants to kill you out of nowhere. I mean, Jumbo Cactuar, give it trample, GG. Similarly, this Blitzball shot on an Odin is completely terrifying to have. In addition, green has some awesome ramp found on legendary creatures, sometimes they're a combat trick, even saga creatures. And then some really big fatties with trample at the top end, and a trick or two that really help put in some more damage. Ways to cheat on creatures. It's just overall a really good color. I like the self-mill theme in green, where you're focusing on ramp and fueling your graveyard. I also think that the green commons at the mid-range level are quite good, so I'm liking green's filler creatures. Lastly, green has a huge chocobo theme, which also helps with ramp a lot and is decent at token creation. The chocobos care about 1/1 counters, but probably not as much as the life gain deck. I think you might want to pair it with some legendaries where you're gaining life as well to really make use of the Earth Crystal and some of the other synergies that put 1/1 counters places. Green has a few cards in there that I'm just not as thrilled to play, but they're totally fine. Switching gears a little bit, jumping back into the archetypes, going into Boros here. I think Joshua is absolutely a reason to go into red-white. Not that it necessarily synergizes with the equipment, it doesn't need to. It's just a really amazing card and an absolute bomb for 3 mana. Lightning is also incredible if you have enough support, but the uncommons are a little bit lackluster. They're fine in an equipment deck, but really I think the equipment build is relying on the uncommons that are single color and the rares to really make them shine. And there's plenty of them, so it's okay that the signposts are not quite as good. Moving on to the red-black build, we're looking at wizards that ping you down for casting non-creature spells. Yeah, this deck has the potential to be absolutely bonkers, especially if you have some of the rares. The more wizards you have out, the better it's going to be. There's plenty of ways to get more wizards on the board, cast more spells, and then win the game by burning them out with direct damage. I am quite excited to play this build. The Izzet 4 mana plus spells deck. It's kind of like the Rakdos deck. The thing about this build is it can take off. It just needs a little bit of work to get going. So I definitely think you should be looking to still be playing a good number of cards that do damage every time you play a non-creature spell. But I also think you're going to be looking for a little bit more tempo and help getting there, with more emphasis on flashback and ways to win the game out of nowhere with one large spell like Choco Comet with Tella. I do not think it's a bad idea to mix the 2 spells decks and play something like Kefka as well and just go into a Grixis build where you're focused on casting non-creature spells. If you don't want to have your shell be Izzet or Rakdos for that build, you can go into an artifact Dimir control deck where you're playing a lot of artifacts, pinging them down, surveilling, and then getting a lot of graveyard value through flashback and creatures that flip once they're fueled by your graveyard. I do think that the self-mill lends itself slightly better to a Sultai build, but at that point you'll be focusing more on your Golgari green-black self-mill synergies, so they'll just be a little bit of a different deck at that point. But make no mistake, Golgari is good on its own even without splashing blue. It's a extremely viable build to compete with the artifact builds. I'm actually really interested to see the tension between this creature-based deck and the non-creature-based decks, especially in draft in pod. So Golgari build looks interesting. There's some cool things you can do with reanimating. I do think that in Golgari you can play double off color spells that are complete bombs like Absolute Virtue and then plan on bringing them back with Evil Reawakened, or cheating them onto the battlefield with something like Summoner's Gilmore. Moving on to the blue-white artifact build, I think it's quite good, straightforward. I do think there is room to play an Esper life gain. Legendary creatures matter with Surveil and artifacts all mixed together. I think Noctis kind of nails all of what you're looking for if you're going to go into an Esper build. But I do think overall that if you're playing blue-white, you're looking more for the artifact payouts like Edgar or Valkyrie Aerial Unit and making use of some good commons. Bringing in white for the legendaries and the equipments is not a bad idea. Alternatively, instead of going Esper with blue-white artifacts, you can always take it towards the green and really focus on the 1/1 counter synergies with the life gain and go into more of a Chocobo build. But that's dipping more into what I would call the green-white legendary Saga deck, with some pretty cool cross synergies between things like Garnet and Fenrir, or Yuna and Bahamut, getting back Sagas, cheating them on with some self-mill. There are some go-wide strategies in the Selesnya deck, but I don't think you necessarily have to play that side of it for it to be a good build. Alternatively, you can play Legends Orzhov or Orzhov Sacrifice and focus really hard on that life gain, and if you want to go into Abzan with that, I think there's a good shell there for it as well. But Orzhov's got some really great ways to go wide, make use of sacrifice fodder, and get some nice card advantage. Especially Elbed Scavengers, being able to trigger whenever a creature or an artifact you control dies. Remember, treasure tokens, those die. So if you sacrifice equipment, the equipment is dying, so this would trigger on that as well. And it's not once per turn, it keeps going. So there's some really cool shenanigans you could do in the sacrifice deck that I'm looking forward to. Moving on to Simic. Simic is technically the Towns deck. I think the Self-Mill is probably a little bit better, but there are some playable cards within the Town deck. I could see you going into Bant for the Chocobos or going into Sultai to try and play the biggest bombs and ramp up to them. But I just have a really hard time seeing you play just Towns and saying this is going to be fantastic. Last but not least, for the archetypes, we have Gruul. I think Gruul is actually a really interesting build in that it is a sneaky self-mill ramp strategy. I think this really plays well as a Jund strategy or a 5-color strategy, but make no mistake, there's some serious self-mill in red-green that should not be overlooked. And there's ways to put a lot of land onto the battlefield right away. Big creatures, big things with trample, haste. This deck can be a beating once you get up to 5-6 mana. In this set, we also have 2 colorless cards that I think are playable in any sealed deck. There's also really good equipments that you should absolutely consider playing at least 1 or 2 of them. Blitzball looks like a solid mana rock, so don't overlook that artifact either. And then some other artifact filler that's absolutely playable in the right build. And then some that are a little bit less playable, but if you need a 23rd card in your deck, they can make your deck. The lands for this set are interesting in that there is a town that transforms into a vehicle. Cards like this are usually pretty good and limited. There is some good fixing. Starting Town is incredible. There's also some colorless cards that fit into a more synergistic build and help enable synergies. I'm less thrilled about playing these cards, but I wouldn't say they're bad. They just need to be in the correct deck. And then there is a whole entire common run of dual lands that enter tapped. Also, let's not forget about the adventure lands. I think all of these are quite good. If you are still listening, please hit that like and subscribe button for me. It means a lot. Leave a comment. Any questions about the set at all, I'll be happy to help you out. Thanks for joining me. I hope you have fun and good luck at your pre-release.